Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Octane Origins, where today we dive into the story of one of the most iconic motorcycles ever built, the 1948 Harley-Davidson Panhead. This isn't just a tale about chrome and engines. It's about how one machine came to symbolize freedom, rebellion, and the uniquely American idea of life on the open road. The Panhead is more than a motorcycle. It's a cultural landmark that marked the beginning of Harley-Davidson's post-war dominance and laid the groundwork for decades of biker mythology. Imagine the late 1940s. World War II has ended. Young veterans are coming home, and America is shifting gears into an era of prosperity and restless energy. Against this backdrop, Harley-Davidson needed to redefine itself. The knucklehead had carried the brand through the 30s and the war, but something new was demanded. Something sleeker, stronger, and more reliable. The Panhead answered that call, and with its release in 1948, it brought not only engineering improvements, but also a look that would become unforgettable. Those polished pan-shaped rocker covers weren't just functional. They made a bold visual statement that caught the eye from the moment the bike rolled out of Milwaukee. And the Panhead wasn't simply a technical evolution. It was a product of its time, shaped by the hunger for adventure and independence that defined the post-war generation. Riders who had tasted danger overseas now sought freedom at home, and the motorcycle became their passport to wide-open highways and endless horizons. What makes the Panhead fascinating isn't just its place in Harley's engineering timeline, but the way it bridged different worlds: the mechanic's workshop and the artist's canvas, the law-abiding commuter and the outlaw club, the traditionalist and the radical customizer. It became the machine everyone seemed to project their own version of America onto. Over the course of this video, we're going to explore the Panhead from three critical angles. First, we'll journey into its birth and immediate rise, uncovering the choices that made it such a leap forward and how riders responded to it. Then we'll delve into the way it became both a cultural icon and a lightning rod for controversy, inspiring movies, music, and myths that endure to this day. Finally, we'll look at the Panhead's legacy, how a design that disappeared from production in 1965 still casts a long shadow across Harley-Davidson culture and the entire motorcycling world. By the end, you'll see that the Panhead isn't just a machine from 1948. It's a living symbol of what it meant and still means to chase freedom on two wheels. So settle in, automotive enthusiasts, because this ride is just getting started, and the road ahead is filled with stories worth remembering. The Panhead arrived at a pivotal moment in Harley-Davidson's history, and to understand why it mattered so much, we need to step into that late 1940s environment. The war had left factories humming, but the American rider wanted something beyond basic transportation. They wanted power, style, and dependability, and Harley's leadership knew the next model had to deliver on all three. The Panhead's engineering shift, swapping cast iron heads for aluminum and adding hydraulic lifters, might sound like dry details, but these were changes that transformed the riding experience. Riders now had smoother operation, cooler running engines, and fewer maintenance headaches. That wasn't just convenience. It meant long trips could be tackled with more confidence. And in a country obsessed with road trips and wide-open interstates just beginning to take shape, this was a game-changer. Micro story. In 1948, a young veteran named Jack bought one of the first Panheads available in his small Midwest town. He had saved up money from factory work, and when he took the bike out for the first time, the difference from his older machine was immediate. The Panhead gave him a smoother ride, enough torque to handle the countryside's rolling hills, and a look that turned heads at every gas station. Jack's story wasn't unique. Thousands of riders across the country found in the Panhead not only a machine that worked better, but one that represented a new chapter of personal freedom. The joy wasn't just about mechanics, it was about confidence, about knowing your machine could carry you further than before. Micro story. The rocker covers shaped like pans were more than a clever design flourish. They became the instant nickname that stuck and gave this Harley an identity beyond its factory designation. Mechanics began referring to it casually as the Panhead, and soon riders themselves used the term with pride. This organic nickname spread like wildfire, giving the bike an everyman accessibility that no official brochure could have achieved. The name captured its rugged, straightforward spirit and hinted at the workhorse reliability that made it beloved. In many ways, the nickname helped transform the Panhead from a machine into a legend. Context digest. Post-war America was flush with optimism, but also deeply restless. Veterans were settling into civilian life, suburbs were expanding, and cars were becoming symbols of comfort. Yet motorcycles offered something cars could not: a visceral, exposed, and personal connection to the road. The Panhead fit perfectly into that moment because it provided enough reliability to be trusted daily while still carrying the thrill of raw adventure. It embodied a dual identity, practical yet rebellious, that few machines of the time could balance. This duality gave Harley-Davidson an edge and secured its cultural foothold. Micro story. In Southern California, custom builders immediately began experimenting with the Panhead as a foundation. By stripping off excess weight, chopping down fenders, and stretching frames, they discovered the Panhead not only tolerated modification, but almost invited it. The engine's visual bulk anchored the stripped-down designs, and soon Panhead choppers were cruising along coastal highways, defining a new aesthetic that spread across the country. What started as local creativity soon fed into a nationwide movement, proving that the Panhead wasn't just a reliable stock machine, it was a blank canvas for individuality. Context digest. Harley-Davidson executives didn't necessarily anticipate the cultural wave they unleashed. Their focus was on keeping ahead of Indian, their biggest competitor at the time, by offering a more advanced and appealing model. The Panhead's success essentially cemented Harley's dominance as Indian began to decline in the 1950s, but what executives could not predict was how much the Panhead would be co-opted by subcultures. From outlaw clubs to Hollywood set designers, each adding their own interpretation to what the machine symbolized. The company created an engine. America created a mythology, Reflection Bridge. What started as a purely technical evolution quickly became a cultural revolution, and the Panhead's identity expanded far beyond its engineering intent. Micro story. In New York City, a small motorcycle club adopted Panheads as their standard mounts. To them, the bikes weren't just machines, but statements of unity and presence on crowded urban streets. The sound of multiple Panheads rolling together became a declaration that this group was here to stay, carving space for themselves in a city dominated by cars and taxis. These riders weren't outlaws, but rather young men seeking camaraderie and identity in a rapidly changing world, and the Panhead gave them both. Their story illustrates how the bike could serve vastly different needs depending on who was riding it. Context digest. The Panhead's mechanical advantages deserve a moment's clarity. Aluminum heads allowed for better cooling, meaning less risk of overheating during long summer rides. Hydraulic lifters reduced the need for constant adjustment, making the machine more accessible to riders who weren't master mechanics. Combined, these improvements translated into confidence, a word that might not show up in spec sheets but mattered immensely on the road. Confidence is what let people plan cross-country trips, join clubs, and take their bikes beyond the city limits with ease. This practicality helped the Panhead secure its legendary reputation as much as its style did. Reflection Bridge. The Panhead's adaptability, technical, cultural, and visual, meant that it became more than the sum of its parts, a phenomenon that would soon push it into the heart of America's imagination. And that imagination would be further fueled once Hollywood discovered the allure of the Panhead, setting the stage for its rise as a cultural icon. When Hollywood began to take notice of motorcycles in the 1950s and 1960s, the Panhead was front and center. And suddenly the machine was no longer just a tool for personal freedom, but a prop in America's ongoing conversation about rebellion and identity. Films used it to signal toughness, nonconformity, and sometimes menace, and audiences responded with fascination. The bike's presence on screen cemented it as shorthand for a lifestyle that was equal parts exciting and intimidating. What had started as a technical innovation in 1948 was now shaping how millions of people imagined what it meant to ride. Micro story. In 1969, when Easy Rider hit theaters, the Panhead was immortalized through the Captain America chopper. Even though the movie's themes were about alienation and the dark side of the American dream, the star of the show was that long-forked, flamboyant Panhead. Its image was plastered on posters, becoming a symbol not only of counterculture, but also of the ultimate road trip fantasy. The irony was that many people who fell in love with the bike's image had no idea about its engineering. They just knew it looked like freedom, and that was enough. Context digest. During this period, the Panhead became both celebrated and feared. Law enforcement often associated Harley riders with outlaw motorcycle clubs, many of whom rode Panheads. This tension heightened the bike's mystique. It was the machine of choice for people outside the mainstream. At the same time, everyday riders who loved the bike for its reliability and customization potential were sometimes unfairly painted with the same brush. This dual perception made the Panhead both hero and villain in the American imagination. Microstory. In small towns across the Midwest, church leaders warned young people about joining motorcycle clubs, citing the Panhead as the machine most often linked to outlaws. Yet some of those same towns had local parades where respected veterans proudly rode their Panheads, flags mounted on the back. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. The same machine that symbolized danger in one context was seen as honorable in another. This paradox only deepened the Panhead's aura and made it more than just a motorcycle. It became a mirror reflecting America's cultural divides. Context digest. Harley-Davidson itself walked a careful line during these decades. On the one hand, they marketed reliability, craftsmanship, and American pride. On the other, they couldn't ignore the free advertising provided by Hollywood and the subcultures that adopted the Panhead. The company never officially endorsed the outlaw image, but it also didn't shy away from showcasing the bike's raw power and presence. This balancing act kept the Panhead in the spotlight, simultaneously admired and feared, which only amplified its legend. Reflection bridge. The Panhead was no longer simply a product. It had evolved into a cultural symbol that carried conflicting meanings, and those meanings were only getting louder as America itself wrestled with change. Microstory. By the early 1960s, the rise of custom motorcycle magazines showcased Panheads in elaborate new forms. Builders stretched frames into radical choppers, painted wild flames on tanks, and competed to see who could push the design further. These images circulated nationwide, inspiring a new wave of young builders who saw in the Panhead not just a bike, but an opportunity to express themselves artistically. For many, their first introduction to the Panhead wasn't in a garage, but on the glossy pages of a magazine, where it looked less like a machine and more like a sculpture on wheels. Microstory. In Florida, a retired mechanic named Bill used his Panhead to travel from coast to coast, documenting his rides in personal journals. He wrote about meeting families who had only ever seen such bikes in movies and about the conversations sparked at every roadside diner. Bill's experience showed another side of the Panhead story. Beyond rebellion and spectacle, it was also a machine that connected strangers, sparked curiosity, and invited stories. For him, the Panhead wasn't about breaking rules, but about making memories that would last a lifetime. Context digest. Technologically, the Panhead was eventually outpaced. Harley introduced the shovelhead in 1966, offering more power and refinements. But the Panhead's cultural momentum didn't stop with its retirement from production. In fact, being discontinued added to its mystique, turning existing Panheads into objects of desire and reverence. Riders who had one weren't just owners. They were custodians of history, carrying forward a legend that would not be replaced easily. Reflection bridge. Even as newer engines came and went, the Panhead held on in the imagination, and its afterlife in customization and collecting would ensure that its story was far from over. The transition from cultural icon to enduring legacy would define its third and most lasting phase. As the Panhead moved from current production into history, its legend only grew, and what had once been just a model in Harley-Davidson's lineup became a symbol of authenticity that collectors and riders alike continue to chase. The cultural weight it carried in the 50s and 60s transformed into reverence by the 70s and beyond. Owners of original Panheads found themselves part of an exclusive fraternity, not defined by official clubs but by the shared experience of maintaining and preserving a piece of living history. Microstory. In the 1980s, a collector in Texas dedicated his barn to nothing but Panheads, sourcing parts from across the country. Visitors described walking into the barn as stepping into another era, with gleaming rocker covers catching the light like relics. His passion wasn't about showing off wealth, but about preserving a chapter of American motorcycling. Through painstaking restorations, he kept the Panhead spirit alive for future generations, proving that the bike had become more than transportation. It was heritage. Context digest. The Panhead's enduring appeal rests on two pillars: scarcity and symbolism. With production ending in 1965, every surviving model became increasingly valuable, not just in monetary terms, but as cultural artifacts. Unlike some vintage machines that fade into obscurity, the Panhead continued to resonate because it had always stood for something larger: freedom, rebellion, individuality. That combination made it not only collectible but iconic, cementing its role as the gold standard for what a classic Harley should feel like. Microstory. In the 1990s, when motorcycle rallies like Sturgis exploded in popularity, Panhead owners often found themselves surrounded by crowds. Younger riders on modern Harleys would stop to admire, ask questions, and sometimes even ask for photos with the machine. For the owners, these moments validated years of dedication. They weren't just riding old bikes. They were carrying the torch of a cultural movement, keeping alive the sound, style, and silhouette that had inspired generations. Reflection Bridge. The Panhead's survival in the public imagination was not accidental. It was actively curated by those who restored, rode, and revered it. Microstory. Custom builders in the 2000s began crafting modern interpretations of the Panhead, blending vintage style with updated engineering. These builds paid homage to the iconic silhouette, complete with replica pan-shaped covers, but offered the reliability of contemporary technology. This blending of old and new showed how the Panhead remained a living influence, not trapped in nostalgia, but continuously reinterpreted by fresh hands. The fact that young builders still felt compelled to echo its design spoke volumes about its timeless appeal. Context Digest. Harley-Davidson itself leaned into this legacy by acknowledging the Panhead in its heritage marketing. Limited edition models and anniversary celebrations often nodded to the 1948 breakthrough, reinforcing the narrative that the Panhead was foundational to the brand's identity. For a company with over a century of history, few models received such consistent homage. This wasn't just corporate nostalgia. It was recognition that the Panhead remained the emotional anchor in Harley's long story. Microstory. In Japan, a devoted community of riders imported Panheads, treating them like sacred artifacts. Japanese custom culture revered the bike's lines and sound, producing builds that blended American heritage with Japanese precision. This international adoption underscored how the Panhead's legend had transcended borders, becoming a global symbol of classic motorcycling. That riders across oceans sought it out proved that its appeal wasn't limited to one country's myth, but spoke to something universal about the search for freedom and individuality. Context Digest. Today, the Panhead is more than 70 years old, yet its influence can still be seen in modern cruiser designs, in the way motorcycle rallies celebrate heritage, and in the collector market where values continue to climb. It has become a touchstone for authenticity, a standard against which later models are often judged. Few machines achieve such longevity and relevance, and fewer still do so while maintaining their aura of cool. Reflection Bridge. The Panhead began as an engineering solution, evolved into a cultural icon, and finally became a legend carefully preserved by generations of riders and builders. From barn collections to blockbuster films, from outlaw symbolism to international reverence, the 1948 Harley-Davidson Panhead's journey shows that machines can transcend their mechanical roots. It represents not just a motorcycle, but a story of America itself, restless, rebellious, resilient. And as long as riders chase the horizon, the Panhead will remain in motion, not just on the roads where it still rumbles, but in the imagination where it will always roar. What makes the Panhead story so compelling is how it has managed to live multiple lives at once. It was born as a technological leap in 1948, answering the call for a smoother, more reliable engine in a post-war America ready to ride again. It grew into a cultural icon in the decades that followed, immortalized on screen and claimed by subcultures who saw in it a mirror of their own independence and rebellion. And even after production ceased, it matured into a legend, carried forward by collectors, custom builders, and global enthusiasts who ensured that the Panhead would never fade into obscurity. Looking back, we can see how the Panhead became more than just a Harley-Davidson milestone. It was the motorcycle that bridged technical innovation and cultural mythology, a machine that managed to embody both reliability and defiance, both mainstream respect and outlaw allure. Few motorcycles can claim to have influenced not just an industry, but an entire national identity. The Panhead did, and it continues to echo across generations, For today's riders, whether or not they have ever touched a Panhead, the bike represents a touchstone for what motorcycling can mean. Freedom on the open road, individuality expressed through design, and a direct connection to history. For Harley-Davidson as a company, the Panhead remains a symbol of when they captured lightning in a bottle, setting the stage for the brand's mythos for decades to come. And for motorcycle culture as a whole, it is proof that machines can transcend their time and become storytellers themselves. As we close this journey, it's worth remembering that the Panhead's roar isn't just mechanical, it's cultural, echoing in every custom shop, every rally, and every dream of the open highway. Its legend lives not because it is trapped in the past, but because it keeps inspiring new futures. That is the true legacy of the 1948 Harley-Davidson Panhead. Thanks for riding with us on Octane Origins. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.